Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of the AIM-plified podcast, brought to you by AIM Youth Mental Health. My name is Zoe Williams, and I'm an AIM Youth Ambassador. I'm so excited to be speaking with Dr. Amber Childs, a clinical psychologist, Yale professor, and an award-winning, nationally regarded expert in youth and young adult mental health. Her goal is to help youth live their best lives by improving equity, access, and mental health outcomes for young people. I recently wrote an article with Behavioral Health Technology about some of the things adults and systems miss without real youth input. And when it comes to teen mental health, I want to dive deeper into some of those ideas and the conversations that came out of it. Welcome, Dr. Childs. Thank you so much for being here. Could you start by introducing yourself?
Zoe, thank you so much for having me. First of all, I'm so pleased to be here and so excited to see you again after having the opportunity to experience your incredible research and insights at the BHT conference. And of course, the opportunity to review your work that you contributed as a part of some writing with BHT Impact. So I'm Dr. Amber Childs. I go by Amber while we're having our little sesh here. And let's see, I'm a Black girl from Georgia, Zoe, who grew up in a military family. And I myself was never in the military, but I always tell people this because service is one of my core guiding values. And what I think about in terms of my work as a psychologist is it's the opportunity to be of service to other people, really just to witness them accessing the wisdom that I think is inside of all of us, and especially the wisdom that I think is inside of young people. I think it's like one of the best opportunities for us to individualize and personalize the support and care and connection to community that I think is so vital to life. So that's me. That's the work that I do. I live in Connecticut because, of course, I am trying to be nearby to Yale, but I am really, really interested in anything that I can do to help support the well-being and vitality of all people and young people in particular, because they're our next generation. So yeah, so that's me. And I am connected to behavioral health tech, or BHT Impact, I should say, by really working on their measurement pillar. So really thinking about how can we measure and demonstrate the impact of the mental health solutions that we're building for youth and that people are building for youth, and impact meaning that like really broadly. So how can we really understand what it means for real people in their real lives, real day-to-day experiences, not just the kind of impact that we're used to talking about in the, mental health and health system space. Okay, girl, that was a lot. That's me, and that's what I'm doing here.
Thank you so much, Amber. Starting off with our first question, what's something adults consistently misunderstand about teen mental health right now?
This is such a good question. And I'm going to be curious to hear what you think about this too, Zoe, because I think, first of all, it's hard. Let me count the ways in which we misunderstand youth mental health. Actually, when I saw this question, I had to think to myself, like, what were the ways that I used to feel misunderstood when I was teenage Amber? I think one thing that I've heard really frequently from youth is that adults now really misunderstand the reality that our teens are facing. So, like, the actual way that the world is working now, the experience that teens are having, both nationally and globally, are so different than they were 15 years ago, 20 years ago, certainly 25 years ago. And the thing that adults tend to do is we tend to reach back, even just like what I did for answering this question, right? We tend to reach back to what things were like when we were young. But the reality is that things have really, really changed and shifted. And so we're using a different calculus to try to understand what's happening right now in the present day. And I think the other thing that sometimes adults misunderstand, that most adults listening to this will resonate with, is that sometimes adults don't think that youth or young people have a well-developed or well-articulated POV on things. Like, they're really out here clocking what's happening and what's going on, and they have an analysis of it. But we sometimes forget that, like, no, they can have a well-developed analysis. They just don't have the same power that adults have to bring that analysis to the front or have changes be brought to bear around that. And I think it's a huge missed opportunity for adults in mental health and just in general. What do you think, Zoe?
I completely agree. Every time I interact with adults, they seem to believe that poor mental health is the result of some mindset or lifestyle change that can be easily fixed, when in reality, poor mental health is a day-to-day condition that we live with, and so we know it best. We create our own coping mechanisms and our own way of life to try to deal with that. And so we are really the best experts of our own mental health and what to do with that information. And adults just seem to misunderstand like how much power and knowledge we have about our own situation.
Oh, 100%. You know what you're talking about too that's making me think is like I recently did this project with this group of folks and we were talking about like bringing our lived experience and our expertise to the front. Like expertise come to the front. And youth have so much like lived experience and expertise and we have to hold that kind of information up as the same level of expertise as what we learn in the research, what we learn from all different kinds of, sources of knowledge, like you have real expertise. The other thing that you said that really got me, and I think I'm probably guilty of this too, is like adults make a lot of assumptions. That's the other thing. Like that's the thing I really got from what you said. Like adults assume things instead of asking things. And that's a big, huge, that's a miss for us. All right. Can I ask you a question? All right. Because you're already bringing the fire, friend. All right. Okay. So in the article, one of the things that I had the chance just to read, which was like so beautifully done. I was so just like blown away every time I have a chance to read some of the thoughts that you and your colleagues put together. Teens were talking about how they were hiding their distress and the difficult emotions or experiences they were having behind humor. And that's something that really resonates with me because that's something that I tend to do myself. But hiding the distress, I don't know if hiding because it makes it seem like it's like, done on purpose or whatever, but it's tucked away behind humor or being overly busy. Like I'm doing a million things. I'm going to soccer, I'm going to club, I'm going to, whatever, I'm applying for school, or even just saying I'm fine. Classic thing, classic. I'm wondering, like, why do you think that happens? And what do you think makes that happen for teens in particular?
Yeah, I really resonate with you talking about humor, especially because that seems to be something we see all the time, right? Even adults do this. We see this on shows and in the media. I would argue that in general, this is still the result of stigma present in our communities. A few years ago, stigma meant that we under-acknowledged mental health. We didn't see its presence. We refused to believe that people actually did have mental health. Now we have kind of the reverse problem in some areas. Mental health is so acknowledged. Everybody believes that their peers have mental health issues, and so therefore their own personal experiences aren't serious enough to have attention brought to them, and they
Mm.
feel as though their experiences aren't like profound or original or new. And so enabling young people to really share their experiences without feeling like they'll be judged or that they're not actually struggling will be a line we have to walk between normalizing mental health and still identifying when it's time to seek professional help.
Zoe, you everything you say needs to just go in a pamphlet. So part of what you're saying too is like, and tell me if I'm getting this right. Sometimes it might be that because mental health is so acknowledged now and it's part of our conversation, people might feel like, oh, if I bring up my issue, it doesn't seem like it's as significant or as severe as someone else's. And so I don't want to say something that then makes that person feel like their issue, I'm not taking their issue as seriously. And there's so much focus around it. But then on the other hand, there might not be enough focus. So it's hard to get that balance right, that balancing act. Um,
Yes.
I was reading about some research from SAMHSA, like the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration, and they were asking teens who thought they should get mental health support, the reasons why they didn't get it. And 92, this was like in 2024, 92% of teenagers were saying that they didn't get mental health support for a major depressive episode, even though they knew they needed it and wanted it because they felt they should be able to handle the problem on their own. 92%. That's everybody, Zoe. That's like, you can't get 92% of people to agree on what to eat for breakfast, but like 92% are saying like, oh, I feel like I should be able to handle it on my own. And then there was another, I think it was like in the 80s of people like didn't want to burden other people, like exactly what you just said, exactly what you said about not wanting to burden other people. Um, I wonder what you think about this. A couple other data points that came out were just talking about like teens were concerned about what would happen next if they did say like, okay, I'm actually not doing fine. The focus you were talking about how people are like, okay, now there's so much focus on it, that if they said, no, I'm not feeling fine, people might have an overblown reaction. And now the teen is feeling like they're not in control of what the next steps might be, or the response is not what they're hoping for, or that the information wasn't going to be kept private. So like I think it's like in the 60s or 68% of teens were like, I don't know what's going to happen with that information, so I'm not going to necessarily really go into detail. What do you think about that? Is that like something that you've been hearing for other teens, or that resonates with your experience of what you know?
Definitely. I know a lot of people who, first and foremost, are very scared to hear what their parents and family will think. I think
Yes.
adults also sort of misunderstand that to teens, they are not the first point of contact when a mental health issue comes up. It's usually friends and peers. And so
Mhm.
adults, I think, are really frustrated by this. They want to be involved in their child's lives, but they don't realize that often that's the last thing that teens want to do. In part, I think part of what you mentioned, this like kind of feeling of powerlessness, that if you go get professional help or if you seek out help from adults, that you're going to lose some of your own power and autonomy over what comes next. I think that teens are really scared about that. I couldn't say if it's more just like the teen experience of wanting to be an individual and take action on your own, or if we do feel like that institutions and adults are going to consistently misuse and take the wrong direction with our mental health.
Mhm. Yeah. Sometimes too when there's something going on that you wanna talk about, or maybe you're like it's like right there under the surface and you're like, "I'm just gonna say I'm fine because I don't wanna have to go into it." But, like, if you did wanna talk to a friend about it, you just wanna talk about it. You're not trying to necessarily go into, like, 40 different levels of intervention. You just wanna discuss it. And this is not on our on our planned thing, but maybe a question in the future for us to think about is like, if there was an ideal state of what those early conversations should look like, what would they be? Like, what are the like if you were going to go to a trusted adult, how can they respond to you in a way like a peer or a friend would to keep the conversation going and so that you can get what you need without it getting into like, intensity territory.
Right. I think part of what you're mentioning, like wanting to talk to friends, just kind of vent, is definitely being seen in a very prolific way. Like this emergence of like kind of like dark humor in a sense, where you're joking about mental health and what you might like, what actions you might take if your mental health got too bad. I
Mhm.
think kind of like walks the line between problematic and like really helpful, where teens can
Yeah.
find that like talking about their problems in a humorous way kind of like deflates their like power over them. But at the same time, like prolonged dark humor can be really concerning and maybe even a red
Mhm.
flag.
It's like you're talking about this fine line between when you're using the humor as a skill versus when the humor actually starts to take over and really kind of blanket over something more serious that might be developing over time.
About yes, and you're talking about how adults we want to create like a framework for how adults and teens should
Yes.
talk in the early stages. I think that adults also kind of misunderstand that teens, because they're less likely to go to adults, don't want to have a very serious and consequential conversation at the first part of like their experience talking to adults and professionals. They want to kind of like ease into trust. And so I think
Yeah.
like starting the conversation off less by addressing like major questions like, are you okay? Are you dealing with a mental health crisis? Maybe let's start on a like a less consequential level. Let's ask questions like, I noticed these symptoms, like you're more apathetic, you have disinterest in things you used to enjoy. How can I help you solve those? And then over
Uh-huh.
time, once you start to solve smaller problems, you can tackle bigger ones and you build more trust over time. And then I think more teens would feel comfortable asking adults and professionals for help once they know that there's already like a track record of experience that they've had where they can solve smaller problems and get the results they want.
We need to write a like special manual together for how to do this with teens because what you're putting down right now is basically like, all right, curiosity and tell me if this is not exactly quite right, but like curiosity is the first place. Like, yes, we're experiencing concern. I feel like something has happened to my amygdala, Zoe, where now like I like crossed over into adult territory and now my amygdala is forever changed, and so I have that concern that shows up there. But part of it is we have to hold the concern in mind and allow for the curiosity to be there as well so that we can build the trust, build the relationship, and shape the context that's needed so that we can then start to address that concern, not just the most pressing concern, but probably those little concerns that develop over time, right? And so you have the relationship and the curiosity, and you get to address the concern. And we just need to like, this is a book we're writing right now, Zoe, that we could do. Okay. Another question sort of in this similar vein, right? Of not necessarily how humor helps us to cover things up or we say I'm fine and we sidestep things. This might be like its own whole universe, but how do you think social media fits into this? Do you think it's helping teens express what they're feeling? Do you think it helps them to keep things hidden more or hidden better? Or what do you think about that situation?
Yeah, I personally am a little biased. I try to stay away from social media as much as possible. I did consult a lot of my friends in trying to answer this question. Unfortunately, I think it's an answer teens won't like very much. Overall, I think that in my experience, social media is mainly for entertainment and a bit of communication. It's not really for self-expression or finding community, or at least teens don't usually go into working with social media with that intention in mind. I
Mm-hmm.
definitely think that social media could be used as a tool for finding community and expressing yourself, but for the most part, teens are usually using it as like a way to passively enjoy entertainment and kind of like take a
Mm-hmm.
break from their day, not to seek out help or find a community. And so like teaching teens to use those kinds of skills can definitely be something we work on as like a society and definitely is growing in popularity, but it's not widespread enough yet that social media can help teens express what they're feeling on a major scale.
Mm-hmm. Why do you think that's like a controversial take with other teens?
I think in part we're a little bit addicted to social media. I think it's very easy to be entertained by social media. I think I've like heard things about like hacking dopamine, like just an instant source of pleasure that teens are really really enjoying. And also it kind of like creates like a popular culture that anyone can buy into, and so that makes them feel like a part of a larger whole. But overall, I don't think that other than those two items that social media provides a lot of benefits to teens, especially with mental health.
Mhm. Yeah. In terms so this the connect there are maybe opportunities for connection to certain communities if you have that specifically in mind. But to your point, and I was actually thinking to myself about this as you were speaking, when I go to pick up my phone and I'm gonna go on social media, it is typically because I'm looking to take a break from whatever it is that I'm doing. And so I think you're actually on point with that. Now, if I was really thinking, okay, what should I do to help my daughter pack for sleepaway summer camp? Take me to camp talk. I need to know like what's the bunk fan and the bunk thing. Then maybe I have something very specific and strategic in mind, but that might not be what you're saying is like the baseline way that people are using it.
Like the app is designed in mind to keep using it, to keep you
Yeah.
addicted and to follow like certain entertainment pathways, not exactly to do research.
Mhm.
And it spreads a lot of misinformation in the process too. So I think that unless we're arming teens with information and skills to use social media as a tool, they're not going to use it as such.
Mhm. Yeah, interesting. So it's like feelings are not even part of the game necessarily. There might be maybe even some not so healthy ways that emotions or certain like mental health states get expressed online that context is not equipped to necessarily deal with. I think that's right. I tend to have a hopeful idea that over time there's going to be more sort of information that comes in that helps people debunk like this is not helpful things to look at, basically helping to learn your red flag skills. What are the things that we need to be looking for? Is this trying to sell me something or create an intense emotion in me? Or is it trying to build up a sense of urgency? And I think more and more, all people, including teens, will be able to clock this more readily, such that it will start to deprioritize that kind of content for folks. That's my like hope over as to what might be happening with that vehicle. Okay, Zoe, I feel like I'm asking you 1,000 questions, then I'm gonna get in the hot seats. So we've talked about using humor as a way to potentially not necessarily address the topic of how you're feeling. We've talked about social media, and I think we did it kind of in a nutshell. I'm gonna be honest, we did a good job with that. What does asking for help actually look like for teens today? Because it's probably not the way that adults expect.
Yeah, I'm not sure if adults are looking for some like direct communication, very upfront conversation about how teens are doing, but it is exactly the
That would be
opposite of
great.
what's going on. It would be, it really would be. I think there's a lot of variability in what asking for help looks like in teens, but for the most part, asking for help, if it happens at all, is very subtle.
Mhm.
Teens usually trying not, I think, to convey that they're struggling. I think there's generally like a consensus that we don't want to be perceived as though we're struggling with our own mental health. Again, kind of because we don't want to seem like either a burden or because we think that other people might have worse mental health and we don't want to like detract attention from them or pretend that we're in a worse situation than them.
Yeah.
I think if teens are asking for help in a subtle way, they're usually changing patterns in communication motivation, like they might socially isolate themselves more, their interest in academics, socialization, extracurriculars might decrease.
Mhm.
Sometimes it even looks like being less willing to share personal details, like how their day is going or what they do like to do on weekends. And usually teens are very, very unwilling to approach anyone about their mental health unless like a very large amount of people are concerned about them. The burden of asking for help is kind of placed on other people. If other people reach out to a teen about how concerned they are for their mental health, then a teen is more willing to talk about it. But until then, teens don't feel as though their experience are validated, and so then they don't want to seek help.
Mhm. So part of it is like for adults to take away from this is really trying to check in with the number one, with the behaviors, right? Like looking to see what's happening. The other thing, too, I want to go back to something you said earlier about that framework of how to have those early conversations. It's really trying to be curious and in connection with teens in a long-standing way is what will help us to see where those changes start to show up in the behaviors, like you talked about, kind of withdrawing away from things that they're usually interested in or, not doing some of the things that they used to typically do. So the behavior is one thing, but then also the outreach seems to be another piece too. So it sounds like other teens can hear this and know that maybe the teen that they see or the friend that they see is struggling needs that outreach to, I wanna say normalize, but to just, I don't mean that in a way of like, talking about what's normal or typical, but in a way of just sort of saying like, "This is fine, like, I'm reaching out to you, so you don't have to necessarily feel a type of way about burdening me or feeling like you're trying to one up me about having, a harder time than I am." So the outreach is really important both for teens and for adults to do for other teens, so they can give themselves permission to say how they're really feeling. They probably won't say it though to folks that they don't have a connection with. So that work of that slow, slow burn work of just like being curious, checking in, not just about mental health, but about all kinds of things is probably like where the real money is. What do you think?
Exactly. Yeah, I think as we were talking about earlier, trying to build connection with teens over time is really the key. I think adults are misplacing their faith in the fact that mental health is a short-term or a rare condition, when
Yeah.
really, like, even teens who are struggling with mental health now may still be doing so in years to come. And so trying to build a relationship where both teens and adults can collaborate toward a more mentally healthy future is definitely in everyone's best interests. I think too, we're talking about outreach. I think that I don't want to add to the responsibilities of teens and their peers to like make sure that their friends are mentally healthy. But at the same time, I think that teens would be much more willing to confide in another teen. And
Mhm.
so having teens reach out to their friends first to see if they're doing better is probably a better strategy than adults reaching out first.
Mhm. And maybe there's even like a tag team situation too of like, what a teen has to do for outreach might even just be like, "Yo, I want you to know that I care about you and I'm checking on you." They might not have to go through all the, nitty-gritty details, but that might be what's super super important for that role, and then a trusted adult can be there to also help with some of those more layered pieces or even a professional. The other thing I want to just mention that we haven't talked about yet, and I know we're going to get to it, is when I think about mental health, I also do want to index on health too. Like, what does well being and vitality look like? What does resilience look like? And how do we think about that as a part of the broader conversation? So, like, there is the mental illness component or poor mental health, but then there's also these other incredible, wonderful pieces. So, teens can also maybe they check in with each other about, like, yo, I noticed like for the past couple weeks, like this is maybe y'all don't even say yo anymore. Oh no. But you would say whatever salutation, and then you would say, like, I noticed the past couple weeks, like you seem really down, or whatever it might be. But you also might say, the past couple weeks, like you've been really in your bag, like you've been seeming like so joyous or so vibrant, or whatever you would say, because that's also a way of checking in. What do you think about that? Do you think that's something that teens actually do or would be willing to do?
I think that they might be willing to do it at first, but I think trying to normalize that over time would definitely be advantageous. I
Yeah.
think that's part of like a cycle of trying to normalize conversation about mental health just in general, is if we're able to talk about good mental health in relation to poor mental health, not only are we allowing teens to just talk about mental health just in general more, which would be helpful, but also we can kind of get a picture of what does good mental health actually look like. Maybe that's like different from what our perception is now, and trying to like create more realistic versions of what good and poor mental health look like can be really helpful for teens who need to reach out for help, and to kind of put their experience in perspective.
Yeah, there's a whole spectrum of it, right? And it's okay to be on like any one rung of the ladder at any given time. And in fact, that would probably be the expectation that you're going to kind of move across that landscape a little bit. And the more that we see other people doing that, I think that also helps to your point to normalize things a little bit. Okay, what questions do you have for me?
My first question would be, a lot of teens care deeply about mental health, but they don't actually know what to do when a friend is struggling. Why do you think that gap exists?
This is, oh my gosh, this is such a good question. I'm going to be curious to hear your perspective on this too. Why is it that people don't actually know what to do? I think there's a couple different things here. Number one is that what every person needs is very different. I'm a psychologist and I'm trained to understand some specific strategies to do, but I'm always checking back and thinking, okay, what do I know about this specific person? What do I know about what the evidence shows, what good practice shows? What do I also just know about being with other people, like you were talking about before? Like, not everybody wants to go straight to solution oriented stuff. Like, let's get to know each other for a hot second here. But I think one of the challenges is that every person is unique, and what is comforting or relieving to each person is different. So, what I find to be actually helpful in addressing that gap in some ways is to check in with the person about what they want to have happen. And they might not always know, but sometimes, there's a couple different things that I find in general folks are looking for is comfort, connection, or coping. Those are my like three buckets. Sometimes people are just looking for comfort to say, like, I don't necessarily even want to solve this right now, but I need comfort and relief. And so then that helps me to think about strategies like just, distress tolerance or different coping skills. Sometimes people are just looking for connection. I just want to connect with somebody else about this or about this challenge that I'm struggling with. I get relief from being in relationship with somebody else. And then some people are really like, I want solutions, strategies, help me get through this. I want this to go away, go down, whatever it might be. And I'm ready to get there now. And that's the kind of like coping. So those are three different things that I think about. And that if I had to sort of pass along to say these are things that you could think about doing, I think the gap is that what every person wants is different. And each time a person is struggling, they might need something different at a different time. The other thing is that it's not always clear what resources are around and available and what adults can be trusted to go to. So, if you don't know what resources are around or where you should go or what you should ask to do next, I could see where that would be like, oh, I don't actually know what to do. And then the last thing is, so I talked about comfort, I talked about connection, I talked about coping. The other thing is like keeping people's confidence. So, sometimes it can feel really difficult to know what to do if the person is like, I don't want you to tell anybody, or, I want you to keep this between us, or, being unsure about whether or not keeping something confidential or private is actually potentially harmful to the friend. So that's a lot of different things people got to be thinking about and weighing. So that can make it really hard to know what to do next.
I definitely agree. I've heard similar acronyms where you're talking about with comfort, communication, and coping. I think that trying to come up with an acronym like that would appeal to young people with words that they would understand and have a positive
Yes.
association with would be really helpful. I've heard a lot of millennials say hugged, helped, or heard, which I think is great.
Oh,
I think including something like around venting, because that's very popularized
love
for
that.
my generation at least, and trying to create like a more accessible framework for young people to help their friends would be great. And kind of on that line, we have a lot of training in school to deal with things like bullying and discrimination and substance use, where we have to navigate difficult conversations with friends to deal with those issues. And I feel like it makes sense to incorporate something similar for mental health. The time frame between noticing a friend is struggling and trying to connect them with professional help or an adult is definitely a difficult conversation that I think a
Yeah.
lot of teens are unsure whether or not to have,
Hmm.
and trying to arm young people with like a vocabulary or some like sentence starters, something like that, to help them navigate would be really helpful in trying in actually making sure that teens are able to access resources that are available to them.
Yeah, I think that's right. I love the hug, help, or heard. You said millennials came up with that?
Yeah,
Okay, we love it. Not too much on us, but that's great. I love that. I love acronyms. Anytime I can get something to even have some alliteration, it helps me out. Maybe we can get like the six C's plus the V for venting. I love that idea. This is all going in our pamphlet, by the way, the pamphlet that we talked about at the beginning.
absolutely. Okay, I have another question for you.
Yeah.
What's one thing that every teen should know before trying to support a struggling friend?
Ooh, this is a good question. This is a hard one. I think it kind of goes back to that earlier piece of like what every friend might need is going to be different. And I would just say, I'm trying to imagine myself being a young person trying to help a friend and caring so deeply about that person and wanting to do my best to just provide them with the support that they need. And I've been thinking also about like what you actually need as the friend who's helping. And I would say that the one thing I would really hope, or my wish, is that teens don't feel like they have to do whatever it is alone, that there are other adults who genuinely care, who you can go to for support. Like, hey, I think my friend is, I don't know that a teen might necessarily do this, but like, I talked to this friend, they're really struggling. I'm not sure what to do. Can you advise me? But that nothing is bigger than being able to connect with another person for support, and you don't have to do it alone. Because I'm thinking about that 92% of folks who feel like they should be able to handle whatever problems on their own. So I think that's what I would say, is that every teen should know that they don't have to be alone in doing it.
I agree, and I feel like I kind of we were talking about like arming young people with kind of like a vocabulary and a framework for what to do in these kinds of situations. Like if we can try to arrange crises and different problems that their friends and peers might struggle with on kind of like a variety of like low to high risk scenarios, and like who do you contact in these scenarios? How are you supposed to help a friend through these? I remember my first interaction with AIM was actually through a mental health first aid class that I took. That kind of like walked me through some of these different scenarios. And that was really helpful because I felt I knew at that point like how I would interact with a friend through any one of these like very different scenarios, from substance use to depression and to the friend being at risk themselves. And that was really helpful and made me feel much more confident if I were ever in that scenario.
Mhm. Yeah. So it's like some of it is like just practical, tactical information, and then this other piece of wanting to make sure that you have and this also hinges on the fact that adults like step up and act right and get it together about trusting teens and building that connection, and their confidence so that they can come to you as
So
they
kind of
see.
like a framework for young people and for adults on how to handle these
Yeah.
situations.
Yeah, exactly. The supporting teen also needs support, is what I would say. So it's like a start with yourself kind of thing. Okay, what actually makes an adult feel safe enough to go to for help? So I just said, like, maybe the answer is like coming to an adult. What do we need to do to actually make ourselves safe for you to come?
That's such a great question because I think adults feel as though teens would be most receptive like to a warm and positive relationship. And
Hmm?
that's definitely true for some of the time, but not always. Safe adults are obviously people who show up unequivocally for young people, but also don't make young people feel powerless if they were to reach out for help. I
Yeah.
think a lot of teens feel as though when they like get an adult or professional involved, they're kind of signing away all the possibilities and their own ability to handle a situation. A safe adult is someone who makes a teen feel as though they're empowered to make decisions about their own mental health as well. Safe adults are people who seem to follow a logical process when deciding who to get involved and how to deal with the conflict. They're transparent with teens about what their next
Mhm.
steps are and who's involved. I think that a lot of teens, especially because they don't feel as though their mental health problems are serious enough or that they warrant getting a professional involved, adults need to be able to explain when and why they might involve somebody else in a situation to a teen without catastrophizing the situation, making it
Yeah.
seem like everything is horrible and they need a lot of help. And so teens are kind of looking for a mixture of these traits, both supportive but also logical and able to follow through.
Mhm. It sounds like the other thing too that you mentioned in there, which I love your answer, is transparency. That transparency is how the relationship is turning on trust. And part of that is transparency, which might include, okay, here are some steps that we might need to take. Let me be as clear and as transparent about what that looks like, who's going to be involved, what's going to happen next, as much as we know, where I really want to know from you what you would like to have happen next. And I think, again, part of the through thread of all of what we're talking about here is like we all have to be willing to put in the long game work, right, around building that trust and connection. The other piece that you talked about too, which I think is super important that I'm hearing from you, and you let me know if I'm getting this right, is like, yes, we want warm support and we want to know that like the vibes are vibing, but we also want to know that we can rely on you to help us move through the paces of whatever the process is going to be in a trustworthy way, and that you're not just here for hugs, but that you also have a sturdy hand in the situation. You're not taking away rights, but you're here to like really guide the process. Is that right?
Exactly. And yeah, and you should be putting the well-being of a teen above your personal relationship with them.
Yeah, yeah. And that I think that's the really tricky part too of I imagine that teens feel this way. Do they? Where you're like, I have this gut that's letting me know that I really need to bring an adult in the loop. And I need to put the well-being of the like from what I know from my trainings and my safety first aid and my relationship with this person, I have to put that above like my worry about what's going to happen with this friend, right? So that I can help them with their safety. That's a really tricky thing. Do you think that happens to teens sometimes?
I definitely think that teens are worried about who they contact and what people might do with that information,
Yeah.
and what adults to include. Because I can imagine so many times, like a friend is reaching out to their peer about a mental health situation and they don't know who to involve next. Like, it's
Yeah.
great that they were able to reach out to me, but I don't know how to get this person the help that they need. And so, identifying adults, maybe if like could publicize like adults who have gone through mental health training, or make that more commonplace. I know that in schools they have like posters in classrooms, but I don't think that's enough. I think that adults need to have some kind of training or education that they know who to involve and at what point in the process, so that teens feel more comfortable reaching out to them.
Mhm. Yeah. And, for teens to also I'm just imagining myself when I was younger of like, "Oh my gosh, there's this issue that's happening and I don't wanna tell anybody because I don't want the friend to get upset with me." But I also know that like this I have a gut that there's some support that's needed. So that's a really tricky balance.
Dr. Childs, what has changed for you after working directly with youth voices instead of just talking about mental health?
Okay, what changed for me? Here's the thing. I say this all the time, but it's just true. Imagination, innovation, ingenuity, creativity happens when you go directly to the source. That's the wellspring from where things come. So instead of thinking just working within a health system, we do a lot of program development and evaluation, thinking about how to structure programs and services for youth and families. The minute we started to really get in touch with what it is that youth wanted to have happen, not that we could do everything, right? But then the minute we really started to understand like the essence and the flow of what they wanted to have happen, it just unlocked so much creative process, so much innovation, so much opportunity. And I think the more that we can go to the source, which is like talking with youth, the more that we actually create the kinds of solutions that meet the moment that we're in instead of having to like fantasize about what the moment is or like try a bunch and not get it quite right. It helps us to actually meet the moment. So why wouldn't we go to that source of expertise? So that's been a huge game changer. And I love imagination. It's the most precious thing we have.
Absolutely. And we've been talking a lot about trust, both in people and institutions. And if we really want to build that trust, then we're going to connect with young people and teens on how they want to tackle mental health in the future, not
Yeah.
just let this all be up to adults. We talked a bit about powerlessness too, and teens feeling like if they contact adults or professionals, that they're kind of signing away their autonomy. And the best way to counteract this is by including teens in decisions being made about their own mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's right. And I think that's right, like for all people. So why wouldn't it be the same thing for teens? Again, it goes back to this idea that what adults misunderstand, that teens don't have a really strong POV on what's happening and what
Exactly.
could be useful.
Okay, I don't want to keep you too long, so I'm going to ask one last question.
Yes.
If you could change one thing about how adults support teen mental health tomorrow, what would it be?
I really wish more adults would appreciate, acknowledge, and really validate that the fact that younger generations care so deeply about mental health, the fact that they care so deeply about their emotional lives, well being, and experiences is the marker of the kind of progress that we ourselves wanted to see, and to stop resisting that or being upset by it or annoyed by it or frustrated by it, but to really see it as like this beautiful progression of what life can really look like. That's what I really wish, because I think in order for us to really change the landscape of how we think about mental health, adults and youth alike, we have to start to tackle some of this stigma. And even though like especially like a millennial generation, we love an emotional moment, right? But there are still these little like twinges of like, oh, the younger generation is so focused on mental health. They're so focused on this kind of stuff. They don't want to do the things that matter. But really this is what matters, like our well-being and our vitality and our emotional expressiveness. So that's what I would say. That we could really, really, truly acknowledge and validate and value the experience, all the whole range of it, not just the negative and poor mental health parts, but the whole range of that experience, which is a little bit pie in the sky and is basically me saying, I hope that stigma goes down. What do you think? What should adults change? What's the magic wand, Zoe?
That's a really hard question to answer. I think if I had to narrow it down to one thing, I would say definitely scope. Kind of like you were saying, I think adults expect that there is a magic wand solution, or there's like one thing that we could do
Oh,
to
girl, I already just asked you. I was like, what do we do, Zoe? Tell us.
and it's simply like by providing resources that teens are going to use what's available to them. But I think this is really like a long-term process that we're talking about of creating a more mentally healthy future where
Yeah.
teens will actually use resources provided to them, that they have trust with adults and institutions. And I think this all starts with viewing mental health as less of a, like a short-term issue and more of a long-term thing that we're trying to prevent for future generations from having to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. Wouldn't that be wonderful? Wow, you're so wise and you have such incredible insights, a beautiful POV. Loved listening to you share your thoughts, your theses, and your experiences. So thank you so much for this convo.
Of course, thank you, Dr. Thank you, Amber.
Yes.
I lied. I have one last question for you. You've done a lot of work to ensure that young people of marginalized backgrounds have equitable access to psychiatric resources. Is there one thing that you would like people of not marginalized background to know or to do to help support the progress of equitable mental health?
Yeah. Oppression affects us all. So even when people don't hold a historically or currently marginalized identity, they are not outside of the mix. And so this is something that I have a conversation with people about all the time, which is that someone else's oppression affects us all. And so it's part of all of us together, working together in unison to address and tackle the problem. And I've heard really well meaning folks be like, I don't want to intrude on the process or step in on the process. I'm like, we are all part of the process. So I think that's one thing that I would say about that.
Thank you so much for
Of
your
course.
time. It was great to get to know you and your work, and we're very excited to see what you'll continue to do for youth mental health. Thank you so much.
Yay!